This is the Candidly Kim podcast.
Welcome to the Candidly Kim podcast with our great producer, Doran Barton.
Good evening.
Oh, that was different.
I'm being different for you, Kim.
Okay, so we've had a little bit of a break, I guess. Oh, and I don't know why, because so much has gone on. I mean,
Right.
So much has been going on the last couple of weeks. So, but one thing that I did for pretty much most of the 6 years when I was in the legislature is during the legislative session, I did these nightly videos and tried to capture the interesting things of the day. Usually it was things I was like mad or frustrated about and wanted everybody to know.
Right.
Like, this is happening. Do you even know this is happening up there? And so, of course, I'm no longer in the legislature. And so we have my successor with us tonight, and we'll go to him in a minute, Jordan Teuscher. And so I would traditionally start those videos with, it is day 7 in the Utah State Legislature. So we're day 7 in the Utah State Legislature, and a lot has already happened, and a lot of big things are ahead for the legislature. So plus, federally, the world's upside down.
Yes.
Right? Like the world is upside down. And, you know, usually it takes lawmakers maybe a little bit of time to break their campaign promises. But but President Biden in his first, 48 hours.
He's out to set records.
Destroying the national economy. And, the contrast to a year ago, we had the strongest peacetime economy ever, in the history of our country. And now we have a president that, a year later, would like to really fast track destroying it.
Right.
So, wow. Plus a lot of other things. And so, I've said this kind of all along, that we're seeing times where it's going to be all the more important that our states be stronger and be those sovereign states individually and collectively exercise the few things that we said we're going to let the federal government have, but everything else is on us. And so even though we've spent 250 years kind of kowtowing and giving away a lot of that, or at least letting the federal government take over more and more that should be ours as states, we don't have a choice now. We don't have a choice.
We're going to learn a lot about federalism the next 3.5 years. So.
I hope it's not so much of a learning curve. I hope that our legislatures are ready to go. I hope our governors are ready to exercise that state sovereignty and push back where we need to. And so day 7 in the Utah Legislature, and I've left the legislature, but I'm not leaving the legislature alone. And so let's welcome our special guest. We have State Representative Jordan Teuscher, District 42, which represents parts of West Jordan, South Jordan, a little bit of Harriman until we redistrict. And that might change a little bit. So welcome, Jordan.
Kim, thanks for having me.
You bet. You bet. So I was just kind of sharing with Jordan that I wasn't sure how much I would miss. A whole lot I don't miss. But I feel pretty confident having a great successor and my great rep, who I voted for, supported in the primary, and I think we're in some pretty good hands.
Well, thank you, Kim. I appreciate it. You have big shoes to fill, or I guess I have big shoes to fill in the legislature, and I'm trying to do my best.
Well, okay, so what's it been like, your first week?
It's been crazy. I mean, I think you know it. It's, I'm sure, very different. I don't have a lot to compare it with, but the first week we didn't have anyone up there, right? We just had legislators and staff, no lobbyists, no constituents, a lot of virtual things. So I think that changed the dynamic a little bit. But still, the process was rolling, and we got a lot of consensus bills passed in the first few days, and now we're starting to get into some of the more controversial stuff.
And that is typically how the first week goes. For people who don't know, legislature meets for 45 days, but the rest of the year they'll meet for one day, about one day a month, where committees will consist of both senators and House reps. So when bills come before those committees in the off season, so to speak, if a bill passes out of those committees, it's considered having been heard at least once by a committee, because you do have representation from senators and House reps. So frequently those fast track the first week of the session. It's already been through a little bit of vetting. But yeah, so this week now you'll start getting into kind of full committee hearings, hearing bills. Tell us what committees you're serving on.
So I'm on the Business and Labor Standing Committee, the Political Subdivision Standing Committee, and then the Business, Economic Development, and Labor Sub-Appropriation Committee.
Nice. Okay, so political subdivisions was one of my favorites. So I'm glad you're on that, because that one is really where a lot of rubber meets the road in our very local communities, with a lot going on. So
it's an interesting committee this year, because almost everyone is turned over. We
Really?
saw that today was our first meeting in that committee, and I don't even know if there was one member of that committee who was on it last term.
Who's
and
the chair?
Jim Dunnigan is the chair.
Okay.
And so he's, well experienced, runs a great committee meeting, and just looking forward to it. And for whatever reason, there are a large number of freshmen on that committee as well. So it's very interesting.
Which tells me we need to watch that committee. They stack a committee with a lot of freshmen and all new people. Yeah, they're going to push some bills through that committee that we better watch. Hey, what committee can we just slide this bill through? Oh, let's give it to political subdivisions. They're all new. But Representative Dunnigan, so this is not new to him, and he comes from serving on Taylorsville City Council, so he brings some political subdivisions chops to that committee. So, and Business and Labor, that's kind of a coveted committee. So what'd you do to get on that committee as a freshman?
I think leadership kind of felt bad that they opposed me in the primary, and so they were trying to make up for it.
Oh,
that's the only thing I can think.
Nice. Okay, so they're making it up to you. So, okay, well, let's talk about. Kind of before we came in, we talked about some of the logistics. I'm super big on process, and so people that follow my podcast and followed me before know that I'm such a proponent of process. I really believe that when you have integrity in the process, you're more likely to have, the best outcomes. And even if I don't agree with the outcome, there's something about walking away from a process and feeling like, okay, but it was fair. And maybe I didn't get what I wanted out of it, but it was fair. And I think that's how you get a lot of public buy-in on things, when people feel like things were open, they were transparent, there was accountability in the process, there was integrity in the process. I've been very concerned now as an outsider looking in with the limitations on the process of the public involvement. But you kind of made note that the first week, even though the public wasn't physically present there, we've kind of done some Band-Aids to try to have that public access. I understand that there's some private Zoom meetings that have been set up for lawmakers to interact with constituents. But there really is something, I'll tell you, there really is something that is, there's something about the people being in the people's house when the work of the people is happening. And to not have that, if the people are not as engaged in the process as they have been able to be in the past, which we should always be improving upon that. We shouldn't take steps backwards. And like you said, you don't have anything really to compare that to. But sometimes that citizen lobbying is even passive. Sometimes I may walk outside of the floor of the House to speak to a paid lobbyist, but while I'm there, I'm approached by a citizen who maybe isn't so savvy about, how do I get Representative Teuscher to come out and talk to me? but to have a citizen approach me, want to talk to me. And sometimes those things are just a little bit passive. Even times where I would kind of walk into the cafeteria just to be present and look around and see if maybe I want to be available, just make myself available. And so not having that, I've had a concern that maybe the public is not able to have as robust of an interaction as they have in the past. And does that concern you? Or what have you seen that is being done to mitigate that?
I think it's a really great question. And I think it does concern me. It is, I think you're right. Being face-to-face in person is a very different dynamic than, going through a Zoom call or something. But I think there's some pluses and minuses that we can gain from this. Obviously, we've talked about some of the negative impacts. Some of the positives are, and I think we see this throughout business. I mean, people, the ability to work through your computers has, accelerated so much in the last year. People now understand how to use Zoom like they never have, Microsoft Teams, all of these different abilities. And so now, as we start getting back to returning to work, returning to everything else, we're going to have to take what we learned from this last year and try to incorporate it in our daily life. And I think it's the same thing at the legislature. It used to be that the only way that you could really communicate to a committee would be to show up to the Capitol. And that works really well for those that are around the Wasatch Front. But those that are in more rural areas, that's quite a trek for them to take. And so in some ways, this experiment has really opened up the ability for people throughout the state to actually get their voice heard. And maybe even people along the Wasatch Front, they may not have a couple hours to go sit in a committee meeting, but they can log in for 30 minutes here or there and testify for a few minutes. So I like that ability. I hope we don't lose that as we move forward. But I'm glad that today we finally have the public in the House and they can be there, and we have at least 30 seats in every committee room, so they can testify there. And then they aren't allowing them in the gallery. To be honest, and I'd be interested in your take on this, I'm not sure that's such a big deal, since they're just watching, they're not really participating in the gallery, and you can't obviously watch everything that's going on. But I'm really glad that we have people back in the committee rooms.
Okay, so I appreciate that perspective, and I've frankly never understood why we couldn't have remote participation in committee hearings, because honestly, this technology has existed for a long time. And there have even been times where I've had to make special requests and special setup to bring people in to testify that are more expert witness types of people, instead of just the people who want to give public comment. So I hope we do learn from that. I hope that is one of the more permanent things that we have. There really was no excuse for not doing that before. But even we talked about your plexiglass cage that you have on the floor of the House. And I'll tell you what, one of the last meetings that I was involved in before my term ended, I did experience the plexiglass, and I've been a little bit in the world of sensory perception, both hearing and sight, and noticing how obscured really my vision was, just even a few people away and across the room. But what I really realized was how much sort of nonverbal communication happens across the room in the House. And now having glare and layers of visual impediments, as well as, Marcia Judkins was one of my seatmates, Mark Roberts, Justin Fossen, great seatmates I had over the years, and a whole lot of putting our heads together and leaning. and most of the time I was lobbying them, or they're lobbying me. But some of that, it's got to be impeding, or Carl Albrecht behind me in my last term. And a lot of this just soft communication that happens, I got to imagine a lot of that is impeded and kind of unfortunate, but that that's part of the process is there are 75 people on that floor that you're still lobbying. You need them to vote for your bills. You might be trying to persuade your colleagues to vote one way or the other on bills, and frequently a little bit of thumbs up, thumbs down across the room can be very helpful. And you can't see that very well with all the plexiglass. But
I think beyond just the plexiglass, you have the masks, right? And that really
plexiglass and masks?
And masks, yes. So, it's telling. We've had a couple times in the House so far where Representative Gibson's had to get up and ask people to be quiet because you can't whisper through a mask, right? And so everyone's trying to talk through a plexiglass, through a mask to someone, and you can't hear what's going on the floor. And so it definitely is an impediment. It's almost impossible to talk to those behind you. Even the clerks, they're both, and it kind of defeats the whole purpose of the plexiglass, right? Because to actually communicate, both people have to put their heads above the plexiglass to hear each other.
So what you're saying is this is one more example of common sense thrown out the window, which is the biggest thing coronavirus has taught us all.
It signals, right? It signals that we're trying to stay healthy. That's about it.
Okay. Signals. Okay, let's talk about your bills.
Yes.
Okay, so you were in the paper a couple days ago. Wow, Jordan already. Representative Teuscher. Okay, HB 197. Tell us about that.
Okay, so HB 197, this is the party switching bill. So essentially what it says is in an even numbered year, if you try to change your party affiliation from January 1st to the date of the primary, it doesn't go into effect until after the primary.
Well, who would do that?
Who would switch right before? Well, we saw last year it was about 80,000 people switched to the Republican Party last year.
80,000 because they saw the light.
That's what we'd hope, but unfortunately, we're starting to see a lot of those switch back. It's funny to pull the reports where they switch to vote in an election, and then they immediately want to switch back to Democrat, or they want to switch back to unaffiliated.
Okay.
And go ahead.
So the Supreme Court recognized that, and what do they term it?
Party rating.
Party rating.
Yes.
Party rating. So that would probably be people's first question is that a constitutional issue to impede people, prohibit people from affiliating with the party of their choice? I will tell you in the primary that I was engaged in, it was reported that about 10,000 Democrats switched just in one congressional race to vote in the primary race in Congressional District 4. So it happens, but so what has the Supreme Court said about party rating?
Yeah, there's a really on-point case on this. It comes out of New York. And New York had implemented a statute that said that if you hadn't changed your party affiliation by the general election, the year before the primary, that you couldn't switch. So, I mean, pretty far back, we're talking at the time, I think it was like 10 months before their primary. And the reason behind it was they were afraid that you would switch parties and not just try to moderate the person that you were voting for, but really you'd have this switch of parties and the people switching would come in and vote for the weaker candidate so that they would win the primary and that their preferred candidate would be able to win the general election. And the Supreme Court found that it was constitutional to defer these party affiliations because having the ability for parties to be able to pick their own candidate was extremely important. There was a compelling state interest in that and in preventing party rating.
Wow. Okay. So what's the reception so far on this bill, and where is it? Where's the bill?
So it just came out of the House committee, was assigned to judiciary. So hopefully we'll hear that in the next week or so. It's kind of mixed. I think most Republicans that hear it think it's really common sense, right? Republicans should be able to pick their own nominee in the general election without interference from other parties. But there are a fair number of unaffiliated voters that feel like, hey, you're taking away my right to choose. And my response to that is you can register as a Republican just like you could in the past, you just can't wait until the last second to make that decision. You got to decide that you're going to, vote in the Republican primary before you actually know who the candidates are, and you can strategize whether your vote's worth more in the Democratic primary or the Republican primary.
How do you feel the bill's going to do? Do we need to help you?
Yeah,
Get the word out?
Yeah, I think it can use all the help it can get. I mean, I think most people, when they hear it, they think it's a pretty common sense bill. The Republican Party is very supportive of it. They'd like to see it change. And even Derek Brown, I've talked to him about it, and he said, in talking to the Democrats, I think they may not say it publicly, but they don't like the idea that a bunch of people are leaving their party to vote in the Republican primary. So the point is, we want to increase legitimacy in our primary elections, and anything that we can do to do that, I think, is a step in the right direction.
And it is a fundamental issue of freedom of association with the parties, and the parties are there's its own private nature. We do have kind of government-sponsored primary elections, but parties are private organizations to a degree that would like to affect their own members and nominees. So, okay, what else are you running?
So I have House Bill 136. This is an initiative and referendum bill, kind of getting support from the Foundation for Government Accountability. It does a few things. So one thing that it does is it stops the practice of pay per signature on initiatives and referendums. You have to pay those signature gatherers hourly.
Okay, before you go further, let's make a very strong, bright line distinction between a referendum and an initiative. What's the difference?
So an initiative is when the citizens want to enact a new piece of legislation, direct legislation. They come up with an idea, they go get signatures to put it on the ballot, and then it gets voted in without going through the legislative process.
So the citizens become the legislature. And not every state has laws allowing initiatives. Some states still just allow the legislative bodies to create legislation. And Doran.
So we had the item on the ballot a couple of years ago for medical marijuana. That was an initiative, correct?
Right, initiative.
Okay.
Correct. Medicaid expansion that same year, and also the Independent Redistricting Commission. I think we have three major initiatives that year that we voted on. A referendum is a check on the legislature. Essentially, it's a veto power that the citizens have, that if they don't like a bill or piece of legislation that's been passed by the legislature, they can go out, get signatures, put it on the ballot, and get an up-down vote.
So that's after the fact, after legislation. Okay, so your bill now, tell us what your bill does.
So mine, it affects initiatives and referendums in different ways, and I'll try to explain where there's differences. The first thing that I talked about, the pay per signature method, this is where you have the signature people come to your door. A lot of them are paid, and they can be paid $7, $8, $9, $15 a signature to try to get your John Hancock on the piece of paper. And the problem I see with that is it really presents a perverse incentive for them to say whatever they want to get you to put your signature on that line. Whereas if they were paid hourly, there's not so much incentive for them. They're going to get paid whether you sign the piece of paper or not. So that's the first thing that it does. The second thing that it does for paid signature gatherers, they need to wear some identification that identifies them as a signature gatherer, a paid signature gatherer. So when you come to the door and open it up and you see someone standing there, hey, that's not just my neighbor that's a volunteer that's feels passionate about a cause, but this is someone who's actually getting paid to tell me this.
Which frequently that could be someone that doesn't even live in the state, right?
Well, there actually is a requirement already in state law that you have to be able to be registered in the state in order to gather signatures.
Okay.
You don't have to be registered, but you have to have been eligible to be registered.
Okay.
So, but what they do is it's a lot of, hey, let's go get all the pest control, let's get the security system guys, and they're motivated, and it's a good business model for those that are running those signature gathering businesses, and they just go door to door. They may be from somewhere else, and they're down in Utah County picking up signatures, and may not be from that area. Another couple things that it does, it requires that when you present the initiative, or just an initiative, let me think about this. Actually, it's initiative or referendum, that you have to give them a piece of paper that has a hyperlink of where they can actually read the full initiative and how they could take their signature off if they change their mind. And that's one of the things we've heard from some people in putting this bill together. Sometimes they come by and they're told one story, and then later, and they sign the paper, and then later on they're talking to their neighbor and they find out, hey, this does something a little bit different than what I thought. And they have no idea how they can get their signature off it. So now they have that piece of paper and they can do that.
Okay, so I have heard from people who are concerned about the referendum portion of this, that may become a little bit more cost prohibitive or logistically far more challenging on the referendum side. What do you say to that?
So there were two elements. There's one other element where they had to send them an email. If on the form now that there's a spot for an email address, they could send it out. And I could see how that could be very challenging, especially for like a grassroots referendum, send out an email. So I just made a change. There's a new substitute coming out that's going to take away the email requirement on referendum. And the rationale behind that is it's rejecting a law, so you don't really need to know all the details as much as you would with an initiative. We're actually trying to create a law, and you should know the details. As far as giving them a piece of paper, initially they were saying, well, let's say we had a half sheet of paper for everyone. You times that by 1,100, or what is it, 111,000 signatures or 117,000 signatures that we have to gather, and you're looking at, a significant amount of money. But the reality is it doesn't have to be a half sheet of paper. I mean, it's one signature. One sentence that just says, to learn more about this initiative, please visit, here's the URL. And so I did just a little test on mine using 12-point font. You can get 26 of those sheets of paper on one 8.5 by 11 paper. So timesing that out by 117,000, it turned out to be like $260 or something across the entire state. And that's going to be spread across a lot of different people with their own printers printing it out. So I really don't think it's that onerous. And again, it just gives more transparency to the process so people know, hey, how do I get my signature off if I don't want it? Or how can I read more about this after that I'm not in this pressured situation when they're at my door?
So correct me if I'm wrong, but your intent really was to kind of curb the ease of the initiative process, and then it made sense to kind of modify a few things on the referendum side. But big difference to me, having been a legislator and understanding that process where a bill legislation can go through as many as 12, a dozen or so decision-making points at every single step. The public's involved or can insert themselves. The bill can be modified, amended, changed, substituted out. With initiatives, it's up or down, and you're not always clear who's really behind any particular initiative. But frequently, as Doran mentioned, the Medicaid expansion, the medical marijuana, and the redistricting, better boundaries initiatives had so incredibly much outside money and out-of-state influence come into the initiative process. The referendum is sort of the citizen backstop. You don't typically see a whole lot of outside money coming into that. So I think it's important to distinguish the two, and I totally support making the initiative process. It really should be hard. It should be a high bar, a hard thing to accomplish, not impossible, but it shouldn't be very easy for money to pour into our state and outside influences. But the referendum, I'm okay with that being not as hard to meet that. But how does that bill feel? How do you feel like it's doing?
I think it's good. It just came out of rules again. It's going to political ops that what it's called? Government Ops.
Government Ops.
The Government Ops Committee. And, there was some backlash from the tax referendum group when it first came out. I've lifted a lot of the restrictions that had applied equally to both initiative and referendum to make, like you said, it an easier process for referendums. And let me just say really clearly, my intent on this is not to make grassroots-led efforts, either on initiatives or referendums, harder than it is right now. What it really is trying to do is make it transparent for people. So they know I'm talking to a paid signature gatherer. I know where I can get a copy of this bill. I'm getting more information than I was in the past.
Well, and sometimes they just, people don't always, like you said, always get all the information from that signature gatherer. And we did see a lot of misinformation, in some of these initiatives. So I love that bill. I love that you're doing that. I support that. What else are you doing?
So I have the great bill that you almost got to the finish line last year. This is HB 159. It's an anti-harassment definition to encourage more free speech on college campuses. And looking forward to seeing that bill come out. Actually, that bill actually came out of Rules and Judiciary. The 197 actually is going to be coming out of the Rules Committee. So it's not out yet, but that one did come out today. And I'm excited to have it heard. I was talking with our USHE reps just today about it.
Don't believe anything they say. I'm just saying.
They told me that
don't
they
believe anything
it
they
last
say.
time.
Yeah, no. Don't believe anything. Yeah, no, really. Don't believe in anything. Okay, okay. So what are they telling you?
They don't like the individual. So I went back to the original bill from last time, not the substitute, because I figure let's start with the pure legislation that you had put together and go from there. But they don't like the individual right to complain. The complaint right that is in the bill right now. But it sounds like the Department of Education has moved forward. That may change very quickly, right, with this new administration and changing the definition for harassment. So I think we want to get this in right now while they don't have, the excuse to say, well, wait a second, we need to hear what the new guidelines are and how we can align this bill with what we're hearing from the DOE.
Okay, so that's what's funny about this bill, but basically it is campus freedom of expression, and the flip side of that, or it's not even flip side, but it recognizes and defines where speech is free and then where it then crosses over and is not protected speech. And SCOTUS, the Supreme Court, has given us the definitions, but it's not followed on our higher education campuses, public campuses. So I ran this bill 6 years in a row, some form or other. But tactically, we had years that they said, well, but the Department of Education is saying something different, and so we don't want to have a bill that conflicts with the Department of Education because they're going to threaten our student loans and funding and stuff like that. But then we had a new president, and now the president is changing that, and the new Department of Education is kind of reversing the Obama era policies. So then the tactic was, well, let's just wait and see what they do. So then we waited, and that was a persuasive argument for some to let's wait and see what the new policy is. Secretary DeVos really took public comment period on that policy about as long as anyone. I mean, she actually took over 2 years, I think, of public comment, or well over a year. So she wanted to be in the right place on that policy, in the best place on that policy. So then let's just wait and see what DeVos does. And I'm like, I'm listening to my Democrat colleagues in committee saying, yeah, let's wait and see what DeVos does. Are you kidding me? Seriously? And for my Republican colleagues, since when do we want to wait and see what the federal government is going to do? And then my colleague Democrat Brian King, well, let's see what Secretary DeVos and the Trump administration is going to do. Are you kidding me? And so really, I argued hard the last 2 years that we need to be independent of what the federal government is going to do. And if they are going to adopt policies that restrict constitutionally protected speech, then as a state, we should say, yeah, bring it. We're going to protect speech on our college campuses in our state. And well, now we have even yet a new administration. We can't just keep going back and forth. As a state legislature, we need to protect constitutionally protected speech. So I'm so glad you're taking that on. Please get it done. It was my baby, and because it was just so important. And I think now in our cancel culture, in our deplatforming culture, in when speech is insurgency and speech is treasonous, wow, more than ever, we have got to protect free speech and on those college campuses where free speech hits hostility. I mean, so.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
I'm really glad you're doing that. Do you have any other bills?
So I have one other major, I've got a couple other small ones, but one other major bill. This one isn't numbered yet. I just got the first draft and hopefully we'll get it numbered tomorrow. But it deals with this issue that we had with Olympia Hills and trying to give cities a little more oversight over what's happening in the unincorporated areas just west of us. And I've spent this is probably the bill that I've worked the most on in trying to get consensus, trying to bring parties to the table, see what we can do so that we don't have a situation where everyone in the local area surrounding something is opposed to it and the county just moves forward, regardless of the complaints. And so what this bill does is it expands on what Representative Perucci did in the last session. And that was if the county decides to make a major zoning change in unincorporated area, and it's within a city's future annexation plan. It used to be in the past they could just do whatever they want. Last year, Representative Perucci put in a requirement that they would have to give notice to the cities, and that the cities could give an objection. And then if the county continued to want to go forward, they just had to respond to the city's objection. And then they could just do whatever they want. Mine gives it a little more teeth now. Rather than just respond, it would have to go back to the county council for a supermajority vote to overrule the city's objection.
Okay, that's great. So you are in the territory where there has been a really slow march to remove local land use authority and to some really aggressive moves over the last couple years to remove local land use authority. With, sometimes the state's been just over complicit in that, and citing that there's been onerous, burdensome ordinances regarding land development, our local planning and zoning ordinances. And, really they've been citing these phantom, long lost policies of way previous city ordinances. And then when they give these stories that are, 25 years old, that, you can't build any houses in the city unless it's on 2 acres. Yeah, name the city that's done that in anybody's, recent history. So that really has been a problem, as it's been increasingly, the state and counties have been involved in removing local land use authorities. So then you have these, a project like Olympia Hills that can just absolutely have such an adverse impact on the community, and the community has no say. So that's a great bill, great legislation. We've talked about that on this podcast. We've talked about it in some of my previous videos. So you're swimming a little bit upstream on this one, but a lot of community support on it. Maybe not developer support.
Yeah, I think I'm hoping that we can get kind of developers neutral on the whole thing, because if they do have, the county support, they can still push forward what they want. But it pushes down that decision to the local level so that cities can object. And then at least, if they get a supermajority, someone you voted for on that council voted for this. And that was one of the problems that we saw with Olympia Hills, is that you could have people that just didn't ever have to deal with the impacts of their decision out here, making a long-term impact decision on this land and never have to deal with the consequences. And that's when I went and talked to people out in the primary and we talked about this issue, that's what they were most upset about. It wasn't even that Olympia Hills was approved. It was that someone was making a decision that impacted them that they didn't elect and that didn't have to deal with the long-term impact.
That's right. And that highlights that we do have some significant changes on our Salt Lake County Council, which is the county that you represent that is facing this problem. So we've got a little bit more west side of the valley support, where again this is the area of the county that will be impacted. So Lori Stringham elected newly to the council, David Alvord and D. Theodore. So we've got new Republicans on the county and have that supermajority on the county. So that's great. That highlights that. And so let's kind of finish up here with frequently, in my experience, the legislature, the Republican caucus would meet and try to define maybe collective legislative priorities. So what do you see as the big issues that are coming up, and what have your colleagues in your Republican legislative caucus decided to try to prioritize? What are the threats that we should be aware of?
Yeah, great question. I think on the top, we have a major surplus this year, right? We have almost $1 billion of one-time money that we brought in. Some of that because we had pulled back a lot of the spending last year because of COVID, and we didn't know the impacts. And it ended up that we were able to pull in most of our revenue like we would in a normal year. So that has led to a really big surplus on the one-time money side. And then we have some money on the ongoing side as well. And so we're looking at a tax cut. The legislature, when you were there, had put aside,
we didn't need a big tax reform in our sinking state revenue ship. We have surpluses and a tax. Okay.
It's crazy. So that's something we are looking at. So there's bills to exclude veteran payments from, veteran, what do they call it? Their pension payments from taxes. There's another bill to exclude Social Security income.
And we did try to pass that last year too. So I'm glad, and that you feel good about that.
I think both of those will pass. There's a lot of support in the caucus for that. And then even looking at maybe a tax cut on top of that. I know that the Utah Taxpayers Association, they'd like to see a 0.2 reduction at least for 2 years, and then put in a provision that as long as the state generates as much as they would expect, that they would keep that tax cut in place. So hopefully we'll see that. One other tax cut that we're looking at is restoring the dependent exemption.
Nice.
That we kind of lost with the federal government's tax changes there. So I think all three of those will pass. We might even see some more of that with all this money. The next big bucket is just infrastructure. So with this one-time money, I think there's a huge appetite to really invest in Utah, and that is in roads, it's in water, it's in even our public resources and parks. With COVID, our parks have just been overrun, so there's a significant amount of money that's ready. You have these shovel-ready projects that you can go out and really positively affect our citizens and their ability to use some of our state parks. So that's it. We're also looking at bonding on top of that to try to push forward some of these big initiatives. And so from a Southwest coalition of legislators, we are looking at prioritizing some of the big transportation projects that we have out here, finishing the Bangor Highway interchanges, looking at Mountain View and at U111, and kind of building that out. And then east-west, what can we do east-west? There's some ideas that we have, but trying to get some of that funding to come our way so that we can keep up with the huge amount of growth that we have.
I hope that U111 receives less priority than Bangor or Mountain View, because that's one danger that I see, is that Bacchus Highway gets improvements ahead of what's actually being used. Also, with the state lands, let's not entertain any ideas to require people to wear masks on state lands. That state property,
Well, so that's a good kind of segue into the final questions I have. I mean, the big constitutional crisis that we've had over the last year with the governor being the legislature for so long. So I know Representative Brammer has tackled that for the last many months. Do we expect to see a lot more deferment to the legislative body doing the legislative work, putting some constraints on the executive branch, both governor and health departments, in what they can impose on citizens? Do you see that coming?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned it, because when we did an informal survey of the body, that was the number 2 most important issue that people wanted to see, is separation of powers. How can we ensure that in emergency power type situations that we have the right checks on the executive, so we don't have what we had in this last year? So I think there's 5 or 6 pieces of legislation that are ready to move forward on that, and I think there's a huge appetite. There's going to be some debate back and forth between Spencer Cox, and he's going to say, don't overreact. This is something that happens every 100 years, whatnot. And he's said several times now, I've been in different meetings where he said, I am not afraid to veto anything, and I expect I'll veto a lot more things than what my predecessor did. And so that's something that we have to make sure that we are united so that we can overcome his veto.
Now, he said that in his State of the Union, State of the State address, which immediately kind of had certain hairs stand on my neck. If you are the governor and you are saying, I'm going to veto more bills than previous governors, are you indicting the previous governors for not having vetoed what they should have when he was actually in the last administration? Or are you already saying you have a crystal ball on the legislation? I was concerned that he's kind of making predictions about the legislative process before it's even happened. And, you're not in a race, Lieutenant or Governor Cox. There's not like nobody's keeping tally on who vetoes the most or the least. What you really should do is, when a bill is before you, if it's a good bill, sign it. If it's not, veto it. Understand that the bill has been through quite the process, and you're a final check. But I don't know how you boast that you're going to veto more than anybody before you see a bill on your desk. That was a little bit of a concerning comment to me. I hope he just does the job of reviewing legislation. If it's good, sign it. If it's not, don't sign it. And listen to the people.
If he does end up vetoing more than, we should probably give him a plaque.
A plaque.
Because he'll deserve it. He will have, been deserving of that title.
What we will, if he does end up doing that, I think we will see the legislature come back and override a lot more vetoes than we've seen in the past. And that's fine. I mean, that's how the process works. And I think we just need to ensure that we're all saying the same thing, that we're all on the same page. and that we can push back on the executive and not let him bully us around.
Okay, so you said that; those were your words. I may have used them though before, and but here it's the preemptive veto that has been pretty distasteful and really offensive to me. That the previous administration had a tactic of just sort of the preemptive veto and saying,
Yeah.
hey, don't even try that legislation because it's DOA in our office. Don't even go through the citizens' voice process of legislating. Just don't even waste your time because I'm going to veto it anyway. I say to that all the time, you know what? Veto it. And he did that actually. Former Lieutenant Governor Cox did that with a piece of legislation I had where he substituted his bill for mine and said, your bill will be vetoed anyway. But if you run my version of it, then, and I just wanted to say, then veto it and do what you feel you must during the process if you want to try to defeat it along the way. But I think that that's an offense to the process. So let it hit your desk. And then do what your job is to sign or veto, but to preemptively insert yourself in the legislative process is really a problem with separation of powers, and yet it's been used way too much than it should be in the 6 years I was there. Sometimes I do wonder if its leadership doesn't want the bill either, so you can blame it on the guy downstairs because he's going to veto it. It's all tactics.
Well, let me just give Governor Cox a little bit of credit, and I won't know this as well as you do, but from what I've heard from my other legislators that have been there for a lot longer, he has been a lot more interactive with the legislature. He's come and met several times now already in just the last week. Trying to solicit ideas, trying to share information, trying to be transparent. On top of that, we have HB 60, a constitutional carry bill that looks like it has full support in the House and Senate. And he said, we'll hold him to it, but he said that he's going to sign it. And so that's something that we haven't had in our previous administration. So I'm hopeful. It will be interesting to see what he chooses to veto and if he holds up to his word on that. But I do have a lot of hope in this administration. I think there's an energy that's been missing there. I think our last governor was just a little tired.
Well, I appreciate that too, and I am very hopeful and definitely hopeful for this new administration, for Governor Cox, Lieutenant Governor Henderson, who was former colleague and friend even before that. And then he's put together a very competent cabinet. Former state board rep of mine, Brittany Cummins, is his education advisor. So I'm excited about that. So a lot to be hopeful for. It is a new day, new administration, a lot of good new freshman class that you came in on. Yeah, we have a lot to do. You guys have a lot to do this session, and we are still in the midst of a pandemic. Please restore some order and some common sense to what we're doing to kids in schools. Just crazy. I know you can't do it all, but it's coming. And I'm excited that you're there, Jordan, and Representative Teuscher, and hope you're enjoying it too. And is it everything you thought it would be?
Yeah, I mean, it is a lot of fun. I enjoy the process. It's fun to meet people. There's just really good people up there, and I think you understand that. Everyone you interact with, even on the other side of the aisle, they're good-hearted people. This isn't something that they're in for power, prestige, money. You don't really get that in the legislature, but you are able to affect positive change, and I think that's what most people are there to do.
I agree. That is the thing that I do miss is those relationships, and most of the people are very accessible. They're just like your neighbor. That's the way government was intended to be, and so But District 42, I feel like we're in some pretty good hands with you as my own representative. And any parting things you want to say while we sign off here?
Well, I would just say anyone that's in District 42 or just in Utah, if you have concerns on this legislation, other pieces of legislation, like you said, people are very accessible.
How do we find you?
Reach out to me.
How do we find you? Where are you? Because now there's like
Yes.
74 platforms that you have to rattle off.
I know I've got like 2 phones and 3 phone numbers. It's hard to know the best way to reach me.
Okay.
But yeah, you can reach me on email, just Teuscher, TEUSCHER @le.utah.gov. You can find me on Facebook at Jordan for Utah, or on Twitter, same handle, or you can call me. I'm still not used to this new number, but I'll
And
tell you,
texting was always my preferred way. So if you're willing to give out your number, let us know. Or...
Here it is. It's 801-810-6170. So please feel free to reach out. I'd love to talk with you. I'd love the feedback and the interaction.
Are you on
Or
MeWe?
just come up on the hill. We're open now for business. So, we can meet in the rotunda. We can meet in my office. We can, I can walk you through everything and have that dialogue.
Okay. Are you on Telegram, MeWe? What else?
He mentioned Twitter.
Twitter, Telegram.
I am on Twitter. I'm on
MeWe.
Instagram. I need to get into the other things. It's just been a little busy.
Yeah.
Parlor blew up. I don't know. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your service, and also thank you to your family, because I know they're missing you right now while you come serve us. So I appreciate all of that. The sacrifice, it really is the sacrifice of the families while you're serving
Well,
us.
thank you, Kim. I mean, your service was really impactful in the legislature, and you've definitely left a void there. And I hear it all the time from people to say, "I can't believe Kim's not here," and it's different.
And some are really
so I'm
glad.
trying my best.
Some are happy. Some, there was a party. And you'll know who they are. But yeah, they are choice. It's a choice experience, a choice in choice relationships. And thank you. Thanks for the compliment. All righty. Well, thank you for joining us at Candidly Kim. And we are also now on you can find me on Telegram and MeWe.
Parlor when it comes back.
Yeah, Parlor ever revives. I am having more interaction on Twitter, though. So there's been, quite a lot of activity on Twitter in the conservative world, as fast as we're kind of getting deplatformed and canceled.
So there's a lot of screaming while the boat goes down, is what you're saying.
Oh, it's crazy. So find us, follow us there, and we're going to try to come back frequently throughout the legislative session and try to kind of revive this is day 7 in the Utah Legislature, and what are the threats?
Is this like number of days since an accident has happened,
Oh, legislatures and accidents are happening. so see, 0 days since the last legislative fatality, the last adverse impact in your life. No, these people are working hard. I know that. I didn't see my family till Sundays, and so they're working hard for you, but they're very accessible. Let them know what you're thinking, and so grateful that we have Jordan anyway. Okay, so we'll see you soon, and find us on iTunes, Podbean, Stitcher, Rumble,
YouTube.
MeWe, not really there for the podcast, but Telegram, we're there for the podcast, Twitter. All righty. Well, thanks so much. We'll see you next time.